Welcome to the Pursuit of Wellbeing. My name's Maria Brosnan. I'm the founder of Pursuit and your host for the show. We're dedicated to providing wellbeing information, inspiration and support for teachers, leaders and school staff around the world. My guest today is Mark Goodwin. For 20 years, Mark was a teacher, school leader, trainer and coach. He's now the founder of Equal Parts Education, delivering turnaround programs to permanently excluded young people. Such important work, isn't it? He works with staff on behaviour and wellbeing through teaching schools and universities. Mark's passion is still in the classroom, and most days he's teaching across all phases in special, alternative or mainstream with particular needs. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Maria. A very generous welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the theme that we're going to be talking about today is boys that challenge. And just in terms of setting that up, I think from my perspective as the host of the podcast, the whole purpose of the podcast is to support teachers and leaders' wellbeing. And if we look at why people are leaving the profession, the number one reason is workload. And the second reason is behaviour. Yeah. So I think the purpose of this conversation is just to look at what is challenging behaviour and some tips and strategies and tools to help people that might be struggling with that. Does that sound like a good starting point?
No, that's great, Maria. I'll just go back to something you said in the introduction about me still being in the classroom. And, 20 years on, the work I do now with unhappy students is predominantly with boys who fall the most foul of schools behaviour policies and education. They are overwhelmingly the bulk of my work. And just this morning, I was working with a lad. And so in the current climate, 20 years later, 20 years ago, my first classes, I still remember them well, my first form, my first GCSE class. And of course, the challenge as a new teacher is with the boys at the back of your GCSE class, or the boys in your form. I picked up a year 11 form, which is a long story, but certainly it gave me a lot to work with in that first year as an NQT. But I often go back to, you can find quotes I'm a history teacher, Maria, so you can find quotes in ancient history about the difficulty of teaching boys.
Really?
You can, yeah. There's quotes apparently attributed to Socrates, bemoaning the lack of respect of the boys who are in front of him, and how they cheat their elders and question everything. It's one of those age-old challenges that we have, and I think I don't mind broadening that out into a societal issue as well, because boys fill our courts, they fill our prisons, and some boys really struggle with the challenges of life. And I think I probably at this point offer a little caveat that there's lots of other students who can be difficult. There's lots of boys that succeed. There's lots of boys that thrive. There's lots of boys that achieve fantastic things. But teachers aren't leaving the profession because of those boys. They're leaving the profession because of the challenges and sometimes unreasonable challenge that young boys, young men present. So I have embraced this all my teaching life, because I was a young teacher and I wanted all kids to like my lessons. And it frustrated me that there'd be typically a couple of lads that would not take it seriously, challenge my authority, find it difficult to do work. And so I've always tried to find a solution to that problem. I was never very quick to put kids out, to send them out of lessons or send them to another teacher. I felt like it was something that I had to do myself. And really, I've just carried on that work, Maria. I've always looked to find an answer to a problem, find a solution. And increasingly, when I go out and speak to staff and train staff, So what do we do with these boys? What do we do with year 9 boys? What do we do with year 10 boys? And so I recognise the challenge that they present, but I'd also like to think that I've got some ideas around how to approach boys when you get them in a lesson that will help you to connect with them, help them to pick up with the work you want them to do, help them to be the success that they have the potential to be. So I'm happy to talk to that, Maria. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were talking about boys in year 9, year 10, quite specifically children, young men in secondary school. Does what we're about to talk about apply across the age range, or are we talking specifically secondary, or will these things help primary age boys?
Yeah, I think primary colleagues would recognise, Maria, that what we're talking about when we talk about year 9 boys can be evidenced in year 5 and year 6 boys, occasionally younger. But in the work that I do now, the first 2 boys I work with who'd been permanently excluded were both permanently excluded from year 5. Those are the first 2 boys that I picked up with. I know it raises an eyebrow when I say that, but for those maybe teachers aren't aware of the challenges even in Key Stage 2. And I mean, if you really want to gasp, I've worked with a year 2 lad that was permanently excluded, and so these problems do feature much lower down at much younger ages, increasingly in year 5 and 6. But I would say that most teachers would recognise the challenge coming from boys as they reach adolescence, and year 8 and year 9 in particular, I've always thought can be quite tricky. Yeah. So primary colleagues are experiencing this, and I worked with let's say J and H from last year, and we got them back in by the end of year 6. They'd found their year 7 schools, and we supported them into a successful transition into year 7. So it's normally a good news story, but it takes a bit of work to get them back in. And my argument, my philosophy always is, Maria, is that to get upstream of the problem and engage with boys before they're excluded, before they go too far down the behaviour process, the behaviour interventions, because that way they're more liable to succeed. If you leave the intervention until the very end of the punishments or the interventions that they're going to receive, then it's a lot more difficult to pull them back to learning and to pull them back to school. It can be done, but it's a lot more difficult. So I always train, when I speak to staff, is about strategies that can support boys in class when they're in front of you, so that they don't disengage. We want to keep them with us, we want to keep them learning, and we want to be able to deal with their challenges. So let's
get to that point. Yeah, let's see what we talked about before we started here. 5 key things that teachers can do to manage boys with challenging behaviour. So do you want to just talk us through some of these, the 5 key things that you would recommend?
I think it comes in stages, and the first stage is just those classroom essentials that are important, whatever class you've got in front of you, whether it's a boy heavy class, whether it's a year 9 class, but whether it's a year 8 class, and you establish those routines, you establish those expectations, you meet and greet at the door, you set a high bar in terms of the behaviour that you expect, the learning that you expect, the engagement that you expect, but you have a particular focus on the boys. And what's needed is a friendliness, I do believe, a friendliness, but also an assertiveness about those expectations. So very quickly, boys need to see that you're the boss. Mm-hmm. And that's that's the teacher's role. So that friendliness, assertiveness is on a similar spectrum to support and challenge. When in your teacher role, when you're building this relationship with the class. But on a very simple level, that's pretty standard classroom management and behaviour management. But I suggest going a step further and find a bit more out about the boys. Try and understand their context. I recognise that's easy for me as a male. I have some experience of the male psyche, of the male wiring. I wasn't particularly good at school, certainly not the first time round. So I do have a particular way in of understanding boys, but I've seen staff across the board do this well. Understand the context of the boys you're teaching. What is the school catchment expectation of those boys? What typically are those boys doing outside of school? And an experienced member of staff will tell you whether it's whether they're rugby boys or football boys, or whether they're sporty boys, or whether they're academic boys, or whether there's a strong cadets in the local area, or a strong scout troop, or there's the local football team, or is it a rugby team? Now, these aren't, you're not finding out deep private information about these boys. It's just being able to connect with their world and show an interest. I go back to a recent example is cars. I have no interest in cars, Maria. My family absolutely are mostly embarrassed about the car that I drive, but it's just never been a thing for me. Mm-hmm. But so many boys, cars are a passion, and I just show a passing interest. So with a lad I'm working with at the moment, it's motorbikes. I've got no interest in motorbikes, but I don't have to know a lot about motorbikes. All I have to do is just show an interest in it. He'll talk about motorbikes. So we do a lot of English through his interest in motorbikes. We do a lot of maths around and science around the bike. I only have to mention the bike and it forms a connection. So find out what motivates and interests the boys. And if you build that connection, then there's a way in with perhaps more complex issues, like history, like maths, and like science. But it's just that social glue around a lesson. It's that relationship building that shows that you are approachable, you're a human, you've got a connection with them, you've got an interest with them. And on the back of that, if that relationship, if that kind of connection is made, then you can really push them academically because they trust you and they know that they can learn with you. So the initial setup and a connection with young men, with lads and their interests. When it comes to the work, something I do, I think this is number 2, Maria. Number 2 is to try and see the work that you're doing through their eyes. If you've got a challenging boy, there's probably a reason for that challenge. And if you are a conscientious teacher, you'll try and understand what that challenge is. And it may be ADHD. It may be dyslexia. It may be some other need that. So if you look at the work from his point of view that you're about to set, I follow schemes when I'm in school. I've got plans to deliver specs at GCSE or at Key Stage 3. But I just look at the work that I've got planned from the point of view of the most disruptive boy that either I'm working with one-to-one or in the class. What does the literacy expectations of my activity look like to somebody that finds reading difficult? Am I asking them to do group work where he'd find that really difficult to contribute? Am I doing a topic that is he's never done before? I mean, is there a structuring to the questions that I could just offer him, a starting point, a glossary? Is there something that I could do to help his engagement with that lesson? Because
can I ask you a question? Sorry, can I ask you a question then, Mark? Because if I'm a busy teacher, and are you suggesting that how do I physically tackle this if I've got, say, a handful of boys in my class that have challenging behaviour.
Yeah, okay.
How do I do this if I've got another 25 students that I'm dealing with as well? So physically, how do I do this in my class?
What I would say, Maria, is that you're spending 5 minutes extra time planning to potentially save you 40 minutes of heartache and a lesson going quite badly wrong. So I would say that's it's actually a potential workload and stress saviour. And just 5 minutes. The bulk of those, I mean, is it it's special treatment, isn't it? But we know that some students need that extra 5 minutes of thought or extra 5 minutes of attention if they're going to engage with the work. And I just point to the time saving of a potentially difficult lad being on task in your lesson for the whole lesson. There's no confrontation about the work. There's no arguments about points being issued. There's no SLT call out, because you've spent those 5 minutes before the lesson thinking about what it looks like. And I don't mind saying that's compassion, Maria. That's seeing them where they are, meeting them where they are, seeing them how they see learning. And just being, it's a generosity of spirit that is good for everybody's well-being, Maria.
Yeah. And let's get specific. I love that. And let's get specific then. So if you're saying perhaps there's a boy that's struggling to engage with the text, just as an example, what could the teacher then do? What would you advise them? Let's get really specific and tactical. What could they do differently to consider?
So I sometimes copy text and highlight keywords, or provide a glossary, or break the text down into a different structure so that it doesn't look so overwhelming. If they've got a TA working with them, then you could ask the TA to use a marker, a book marker, or a visual screen, something that makes them, sometimes timings as well. We're going to do this for, a lad will typically say, I hate reading, I'm not reading. Okay, well, we're doing this for 5 minutes. Can we do it for 5 minutes? 5 minutes, is that all? Yeah, 5 minutes. We're just going to do 5 minutes of reading. Okay, yeah, I can do that. You sure? Yeah, I can do 5 minutes. And of course, then it doesn't matter how long you read for, because they've engaged with the task. And usually you can't push it, but 5 minutes can easily become 10 or 12 minutes. And they've lost sight of the original difficulty, which was their fear of reading. You've helped them to overcome their fear of reading. So all of those, we don't have, as teachers, we have less choice about the books we read, but there might be a bit of flexibility depending on the teacher you are about the kind of reading that you do. And certainly when I work one-to-one with boys, I've used everything from motorcycle magazines to features on boxers, to graphic novels, Goosebumps, anything. There's so many. We are clever as teachers, and we can come up with any number of engaging texts that would catch the eye of a disgruntled boy. It is difficult when you've got to deliver Dickens or Shakespeare. But again, I'd argue that there's ways in it for boys, and whether that's a visual, Macbeth in comic form, or just I don't mind really going to lowest common denominator, Maria, and talking about blood, guts, and war. If that gets a boy engaged in Macbeth, if I've done that before and told them this is all about power, this is all about the brutal seizure of power and power over other people and murder and witches, and that's lowest common denominator. But if that gets a lad picking up with, I'll do it. I wish it was Shakespeare for the love of great literature, but sometimes we've got to play a lower common denominator. And
of course we do. I hated Shakespeare when I was a kid because I never had a teacher that could engage me with it. My husband loved Shakespeare because he had a fantastic teacher that could speak in a way that engaged. So it makes perfect sense what you're saying, and they tie together beautifully. So if you find out what your challenging boys really like, and then you can link it somehow, then that makes perfect sense. Should we move to? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Maria. I was just going to say that it is. I mean, it's such a varied response when you say about strategies for boys. It's such because at the same time of discussing lowest common denominator, I sometimes go to the very top as well, because boys have a competitive some boys have a competitive instinct, and they switch off or challenge because they fear failure. And sometimes I go, right, do you want a grade A? Do you want a grade B? And if some boys need that kind of intervention where it's about tapping into that need to succeed, that how that plays with maybe parents or their peer group. They fear failure, so they become difficult and are challenging a lesson. And sometimes it's about playing to the highest common denominator as well, and saying things like, well, Shakespeare is really difficult actually, but let's give it a go. It is quite tricky, it is quite difficult. Do you think you can? And it's playing to their that little nugget of competition and hierarchy and status. So it does work both ways, and we know as teachers that challenge can come from difficulty, but challenge can also come from fear of achievement and fear of success and uncertainty around success. So it's a different conversation, but with a similar ethos. You're trying to find a way to connect this work with a lad who's displaying challenging tendencies. So sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low, Maria. So
yeah, and that's point number 3 then, is to have high expectations about them and their behaviour and their work.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I don't get it often because I think I'm pretty clear about where I'm coming from. But you do sometimes get a bit of pushback, like, well, don't ask me to be his mate, or well, you're just dumbing it down. Comics, you're dumbing it down. And I don't get annoyed very often, Maria, but I do quite strongly push back against that, because my expectations are I want young men that that I'd be proud of. That I want to see young men in schools contributing positively, in society positively. So my expectations are that they can take responsibility, for example, and they don't shirk, they don't make excuses, and they don't lie, and they don't speak disrespectfully of other people in the class or girls in the class or other teachers. So I talk about responsibility, but I talk about potential. So it's a double-edged thing, but it's always high expectations. I know for me personally, a GCSE exam is not the be-all and end-all, but the school system in the UK is set up for that as their measure of success, and it opens the doors to onward progression in education. So I talk in those terms that I want them to succeed. I want them to get the best grade they possibly can, but I also want them to be kind and speak positively and take responsibility and be compassionate themselves. So my expectations are across the board, and I'm not soft on the lads. I think that's where you'll get taken for a ride, because they'll see that as a weakness. So I don't mind holding a very high line when it comes to the work and the because my argument is that once you get engagement from boys, and I've done this before, you can do philosophy, for example. You can do the more difficult aspects of English, and I've done Shakespeare with permanently excluded lads. I've done Dickens. I've done English GCSE, and I don't think there's much more difficult than that with the current specs, with lads that were target grades of 1s and 2s, and we've done the text and we've read the text and we've struggled through it. So the high expectations about work and about behaviour, but keep them flexible. You know, I've got high expectations. Those are the foundations. But you have to give kids a bit of wiggle room as well around those. So have a good conversation when they do make mistakes.
Yeah.
That's an important, especially with boys, because boys make a mistake, and for boys it can be a loss of status. It can be, in their view, really damaging, and that's where you can lose everything with a criticism that's delivered harshly or unthinkingly. So have a conversation about mistakes ready, because boys being boys will make mistakes. And so that's one of the things that I do talk about is conversations around mistakes. They've got to make mistakes, but you've got to be able to draw them back in to you as well.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, well, talking about mistakes, and what specifically would you say? Because of course everybody makes mistakes, and I think in schools we set up failure to be this terrible thing, rather than if we talk about it more openly and encourage it and fail fast and learn from your failures, even if we call them failures, you know. How can we talk to boys about mistakes where I completely agree with, they feel like they lose face or they lose status in the room?
Well, I'd go back to that those opening the opening part of our conversation, Marie, where we talked about the kind of relationship you build with the without that relationship, a mistake and the questions or challenge that comes around mistake will be viewed just purely as criticism, and will be rejected. If there's a relationship in place based around an understanding of their context, based around high expectations, then the mistake, the conversation can be had where the teacher's intervention is feedback. It's feedback. I'm just giving you feedback. So, and that in itself is a starting point where that conversation might be engaged with and might be accepted. I always go back to potential, Maria, when I talk potential, and I say that, you know, I work with you, you're in my lesson, and as a pupil in my lesson, or because I'm working with you, I believe you have unlimited potential. Okay, you've made a mistake. Everybody deserves a clean page. Everybody deserves a fresh start. I'm more than prepared to give you that. In fact, that's what we do at this school. You know, most schools would operate on that policy. But the punchline and the killer line is that everybody makes a mistake, but only a fool repeats it. And so if the lads are hearing that from year 7 from their teachers, they've got a bit of space there to, you know, call out or to say the wrong thing or to forget their homework or to chat after they've been told. But you're telling them that it doesn't meet your expectations. You understand that they were just chatting, but don't do it again. I mean, the frustration I feel is that lads get to year 10 and you're still telling them about, you know, they're not buying it. They haven't had the right sort of conversations. But I believe that giving lads a blank slate, also looking for the positives. Yes, you've made one mistake. Let's a lad to protect themselves will sometimes catastrophize it. Well, this is the end of the world. I've got a detention, or I'm in isolation, so I'm worthless. I hate this school. I give up. So they catastrophize it. So what you're trying to do to stop that, you recognise that the mistake is that there's a context to it, and there's been, you know, 4 weeks, 5 weeks of really positive behaviour, countless examples when things have gone well. Countless examples of work that's been done well, countless examples of relations. This is just one example where it's worth. And you come back from this by making amends, doing what's necessary, whatever the school says, and then forgiving yourself. You know, that's a powerful conversation to have with a lad. The first time they hear that from me, you want to see lads' faces drop when you say forgive yourself. But it's really important, because shame and embarrassment just, you know, reinforces the feelings, the worthless feelings some lads have about themselves. So, you know, schools are getting it wrong when they try to humiliate lads or shame them, because that just feeds into their negative self-perception. So, I say forgive yourself, but don't let it happen again. What are you going to do to avoid this in the future? And you have a conversation about relationships. You have a conversation.
And that leads nicely to the fourth point, where you say to see the best in them. So can you talk about how, I love that idea of helping them even learn that skill of forgiving themselves. So what else can you do to see the best, help for you to see the best in them and help them see the best in themselves?
So I talk about being human, Maria.
Yes.
And, we're human beings, here's an example. On Friday, a lad I'm working with has started in year 7, a looked after and vulnerable kid who had real difficulties in year 6. And he started in year 7, and in the first 6 days, he managed to pick up 2 points. And in that school's behaviour policy, that means he gets a detention. So he picked up a point for forgetting his homework, and he picked up a point for chatting in a lesson after being given a warning. So fair cop, 2 points equals a 15-minute detention. To him, it was the end of the world. Everything that he'd done to try and put things right had gone out the window, so et cetera, et cetera. So I had this long conversation talking about all these different things that I've just talked about. But I said to him about my recent falling foul recently of the speeding cameras, UK speeding cameras. And I said, do you think it's any different for us, Elle? Do you think it's any different? I'm a grown adult. I know the speed limit, and I got zapped doing 26 in a 20, but it was a 20-mile-an-hour zone in a place I don't know, blah, blah. And I told him I've got to go and do a speed awareness course. And he's like, and I'm trying to get him to understand that this is what happened. So what could I do? I could, shout and argue at the police. It's not going to make them change their mind. I could blame the speed cam. Why is there a speed camera there? I could make all sorts of excuses about I didn't know the area, et cetera, et cetera. But human beings and how we deal with mistakes, and sharing that with him helped him to understand that he needed to accept what's happened, forgive himself, do the detention, but also give himself a clean page and to go in on Monday, which he has. And I always push the boys to apologise. I know it's not fashionable, but there's a real power in apologising. And he said, but I said, well, if you say sorry, what message are you sending to that teacher? And he knew that she would think that he took himself seriously, that he was a well-mannered young man. And in the background, his carer was kind of like almost breaking down. She was like, because he was saying all these things that showed a level of reflection and a maturity for an 11-year-old. And he did it, and he apologised, and I'm hoping that will help him to move forward. But it certainly gave him a lot more in his toolbox than he might have had when that first detention comes along.
That's beautiful. That beautifully leads to your final point, which is about appealing to his better nature.
Yeah.
And how to, it's not easy to apologise, but if somebody can just skillfully help you learn to do that, and appealing to his better nature felt. Well,
everything I do in schools is driven by a recognition that in society, young people get a raw deal, most of the time. Young people, I mean, COVID's their fault now. Young people, they're getting, they get blamed, they get criticised a lot. So it's just trying to, it's trying to visualise what help all students, but lads especially, help them to visualise what they might be. And if that sounds a bit woo-woo, that's really what I'm trying to do. They need to picture themselves as a young man that fulfills their potential, that pleases their parents, that finds meaning and purpose in their life, in their job, values themselves. So I'm trying to help them to visualize that by saying, well, I think you're super smart, H, I think you've got a brain the size of Stoke-on-Trent, J, and it's it's a little bit of fake it till you make it, but it's done with a very honest and compassionate heart, and I see it draw dividends all the time, because sometimes we're trying to dig some lads because of their schooling, sometimes because of their parenting, sometimes because of their interaction with, you know, other adults outside school, have got a pretty low opinion of themselves, and you know, you have to give them the opportunity to visualize and then act in esteemable ways. And you know, there's that's a bit of a mantra of mine, is that self-esteem is built through esteemable acts.
Yeah.
So it's just helping lads to act in a way that we want them to, you know, to be themselves, to be authentic, to achieve and have a smile on their face and not go around hating the world and you know, fighting teachers, you know, challenging teachers. So helping them to see that is a big part of that, because they sometimes struggle to see it themselves.
Yeah. Mark, thank you. That we've whizzed through half an hour and 5 of your really...
We've crammed a lot into that, Maria, haven't we? We've crammed a lot in there.
Yeah. And I think to summarise what you've said, though, it feels like building relationships and meeting these boys where they are, and of course it applies to all students, but the boys that you're finding most challenging in your class, and building that relationship over the course of the academic year. It's not going to happen in 5 minutes. It's not going to happen in one lesson, but having high expectations, seeing the boys, how did you describe it? Appealing to his better nature, seeing the best of them, looking at your planning through their eyes, and just getting to know them a little bit to understand what they're interested in, because not all boys are going to be interested in sport or rugby or bikes or cars. There might be music. It might be something that we don't necessarily link with boys, but whatever it is for them, if we can just find that little seed of interest in them, it will help build that.
And you don't have to share their interest. You just have to listen,
exactly.
Maria. And, you know, you just have to ask that. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah.
And, you know, you find out more than you needed to know about chihuahuas or weasels or, you know, livestock. But hey ho, and I just, you know, to kind of bring it back to what we opened up with, you know, I do this and I speak on this because I want to give staff, make reference to things that have worked for me, things that continue to work for me, so that staff don't leave the profession because of the challenges they face, but they feel empowered to go and to continue having a go. And it is difficult, and you know, a challenging class can be, you know, so draining, so difficult, but there are ways to win with a challenging class and challenging students. And I just hope that in there is something that would help teachers, whether they're young teachers or more experienced teachers, to go back to a class or to go back to a lad with a different approach and see a more positive connection being made.
Thank you, Mark. That's a
pleasure, Maria. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Well, if you'd like to reach out to Mark, I've been speaking with Mark Goodwin. You can find Mark on Twitter at Mark Goodwin8. That's number 8. His website is equalpartseducation.co.uk, and Mark has written a very simple 1-page boy-friendly lesson at your school pack that you can download wherever you're watching this, or come to our website or Mark's website. I'm sure it'll be up there soon, Mark.
Yes.
And yeah, reach out to Mark if you need any support with dealing with challenging behaviour of boys.
Absolutely, Maria. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. Check out our website, pursuitwellbeing.com, for information about our 5-step wellbeing action plan for teachers and school leaders. There's a link in the description below. Or take our free teacher anxiety quiz at teacheranxietyquiz.com. The quiz only takes a couple of minutes and you'll get a better understanding of where you are today, plus tips to immediately feel better. I'd love you to connect with me on Twitter at Maria Brosnan. And if you enjoyed the show, please hit the subscribe button. If you feel inspired, give us a thumbs up, comment, and share it with your friends.